My wife brought legal documents to dinner, telling me her sister would manage my clinic and get 45% profit. I opened my briefcase, handed them clause 4.3, and watched my wife freeze. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and your gut starts doing backflips like it's auditioning for Cirque du Soleil? Yeah, well, that's exactly what hit me the second I stepped through the mahogany double doors of my in-laws' McMansion on this particular Sunday afternoon. And let me tell you, after 3 years of marriage to Isabel, I've developed a pretty decent radar for when the Mitchell family is up to something that's going to royally screw me over. The first red flag should have been Isabel practically lunging at me the moment I crossed the threshold, her smile so wide and fake it could have been sponsored by Botox. "Aaron, honey," she chirped, reaching for my coat with the enthusiasm of a car salesman who just spotted a sucker walking onto the lot. "I'm so glad you could make it." Like I had a choice. Sunday dinners at Casa Mitchell weren't exactly optional in our household. They were more like a weekly taxation without representation, if you catch my drift. But here's the thing that really got my spidey senses tingling. Isabel's hands were shaking as she hung up my jacket. Now, my wife might be a lot of things, materialistic, entitled, and about as deep as a kiddie pool, but nervous isn't usually one of them. The woman once returned a perfectly good sweater to Nordstrom because she decided she didn't like the way it made her feel on Tuesdays. Confidence has never been her problem. Then came Martin, my father-in-law, striding over like he owned the place, which, to be fair, he did, along with half the commercial real estate in downtown Seattle. The man grabbed my hand in what I can only describe as a death grip that would have made a mob enforcer proud. "Aaron, my boy," he boomed, pumping my arm like he was trying to strike oil. "Good to see you, son." The way he said son made my skin crawl, probably because it sounded less like familial affection and more like a gangster claiming ownership of his latest acquisition. Now, Martin's always been a firm handshake kind of guy. You know, one of those old-school businessmen who thinks a limp handshake is basically a character flaw. But this was different. This had intent behind it, like he was trying to establish dominance before whatever circus act they had planned for me today. And trust me, with the Mitchell family, there's always a circus act brewing. Clara, Isabel's mother, materialized next to us like some kind of suburban ghost, floating in with that practiced smile she'd probably perfected during her junior league days. "Aaron, darling," she cooed, air-kissing both my cheeks with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. "You look wonderful. A little thin, though. Are you eating enough?" This from a woman whose idea of a hearty meal is a kale salad with a side of judgment. But even Clara seemed off her game tonight. Usually, she'd launch into some passive-aggressive monologue about how I work too much or how I should really consider getting a real haircut instead of whatever my barber was doing to me. Tonight, though, she was being nice, polite, rehearsed, like she'd been practicing lines in the mirror for the past week. And then there was Veronica. Oh, sweet Jesus. Veronica was practically vibrating with excitement, bouncing on her designer heels like a toddler who'd just been promised ice cream for dinner. Isabel's younger sister had this glow about her. Not the healthy kind you get from exercise or good genes, but the scheming kind that politicians get right before they announce their candidacy for higher office. She kept shooting these little conspiratorial glances at her family members, the kind of looks that said, "We're about to pull off the heist of the century, and the mark doesn't suspect a thing." The whole scene felt like I'd walked into some twisted Norman Rockwell painting where everyone was smiling just a little too hard, and the apple pie was probably poisoned. We moved into the dining room, and that's when I knew for sure that something was seriously wrong. The table was set with Clara's finest china, the stuff that usually only came out for Christmas or when she wanted to impress her book club friends with how refined she was. Fresh flowers adorned the center, some expensive-looking arrangement that probably cost more than most people's grocery budget. The whole setup screamed special occasion, except nobody had bothered to tell me what we were celebrating. The napkins were cloth instead of paper. The silverware was the good stuff, not the everyday stainless steel. Hell, they'd even broken out the crystal water glasses that Clara usually kept locked away like they were the crown jewels. Everything was perfectly arranged, perfectly positioned, like we were about to film a commercial for How to Manipulate Your Son-in-Law 101. But the real kicker, the thing that made my chest tighten like someone was slowly turning a vise around my ribcage, was the manila folder sitting beside Martin's plate. Thick, official-looking, The kind of folder that contained either life insurance policies or divorce papers. Given my track record with the Mitchell family, I was betting it wasn't good news. Martin caught me staring at it and actually had the balls to pat the folder possessively, like a dragon guarding its treasure. "Just a little business to discuss after dinner, Aaron," he said with that shark smile of his. "Nothing to worry about." Yeah, right. When a guy like Martin Mitchell says, "nothing to worry about," you'd better start updating your resume and checking your bank account balance. I settled into my usual chair, the one at the far end of the table that made me feel like I was sitting at the kids' table during Thanksgiving, and tried to play it cool. But inside, my brain was going full conspiracy theory mode, running through every possible scenario of how they were planning to screw me over this time. Because make no mistake about it, that's what this was. The Mitchell family didn't break out the good china unless they wanted something, and whatever they wanted, it was big enough to require props and staging. The air in that dining room felt thick enough to cut with a knife, charged with the kind of tension you usually only see in courtrooms or divorce mediation sessions. And there I was, sitting in the middle of it all, wondering how the hell I'd ended up married into a family that treated Sunday dinner like a board meeting where I was apparently the only one who hadn't seen the agenda. So there I was, trapped in what felt like the world's most expensive hostage situation, when Clara decided to kick off the evening's entertainment with her signature move. Small talk so painfully forced it could have been used as a torture technique at Guantanamo Bay. "Aaron, dear, how's the weather been treating you?" she asked, passing around a platter of what looked like artisanal something or other that probably cost more per ounce than my college textbooks. "I mean, seriously? The weather? We live in Seattle, Clara. It's been raining since the Clinton administration, and it'll be raining when your great-grandchildren are collecting Social Security." But I played along like the good little son-in-law I was supposed to be, nodding and making appropriate sounds while internally calculating how many billable hours I'd need to work to afford therapy after this dinner was over. Martin jumped in next with his usual repertoire of awkward dad jokes and comments about the Seahawks' latest disappointing season, but I could see him checking his watch every few minutes like he was waiting for some predetermined moment to drop whatever bomb they'd been cooking up. The man had all the subtlety of a freight train carrying dynamite. But it was Isabel who really started laying the groundwork for whatever fresh hell they had planned. She began steering the conversation toward my clinic with the precision of a GPS system that had been programmed by someone with seriously questionable intentions. "You know, Aaron," she said, cutting her salmon into perfect little squares like she was performing surgery, "you've been working so incredibly hard lately. I barely see you anymore." Now, let me pause here for a moment to appreciate the sheer audacity of this statement. This coming from a woman whose most strenuous weekly activity was deciding which yoga class to skip so she could get her nails done instead. Isabel's idea of hard work was choosing between the vanilla latte and the caramel macchiato at Starbucks. But sure, let's talk about my work ethic like it's some kind of character flaw. I mean, she continued, reaching over to squeeze my hand with what I'm sure she thought was loving concern. "When was the last time you took a real vacation? Or even a weekend off?" The way she said it made it sound like I was some kind of workaholic who'd lost touch with what really mattered in life, instead of a guy who was busting his ass to build something meaningful while supporting a wife whose monthly shopping budget could fund a small country's military. Veronica nodded enthusiastically, like Isabel had just solved world hunger. "Totally. Work-life balance is so important these days. You can't pour from an empty cup, you know?" This from someone whose longest employment stint was a 3-month gig as a social media influencer for a company that sold overpriced scented candles to suburban moms with too much disposable income. But here's where things got really interesting. Martin suddenly straightened up in his chair, cleared his throat with the gravitas of a Supreme Court justice about to deliver a landmark ruling, and gave everyone at the table this look that said, "Ladies and gentlemen, it's showtime." "You know, Aaron," he began, his voice taking on that particular tone that rich guys use when they're about to explain why screwing you over is actually doing you a favor. Isabel raises an excellent point about balance. And it got me thinking about something we've been discussing as a family. Oh, here we go. They've been discussing me as a family. How absolutely delightful. Nothing says healthy marriage like your wife's parents holding strategy sessions about your career choices behind your back. Martin leaned forward, steepling his fingers like some kind of corporate Yoda about to dispense wisdom that would probably cost me thousands of dollars. Family businesses, he announced, need family management. Clara nodded so vigorously I was worried she might give herself whiplash. It's only natural, she chimed in, as if this was some kind of universal law instead of grade A bullshit they'd just made up to justify whatever scheme they were running. And then Isabel dropped the hammer. With that sweet, innocent smile that had probably gotten her out of trouble since she was 5 years old, she reached for the manila folder that had been sitting there like a loaded gun all evening. Actually, honey, she said, sliding the folder across the table toward me like she was dealing cards in some high-stakes poker game. Veronica has put together the most amazing business plan. Veronica practically glowed with pride, sitting up straighter and smoothing down her hair like she was about to accept an Academy Award. I've been doing so much research, Aaron, she gushed, her voice bubbling with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for multi-level marketing schemes and door-to-door vacuum cleaner sales. I know I can really help take your clinic to the next level. My fork, which had been making its way toward my mouth with a piece of perfectly seasoned asparagus, froze mid-air like someone had hit the pause button on my entire nervous system. Take my clinic to the next level? The clinic I'd built from nothing? The clinic I'd poured every ounce of my blood, sweat, and what remained of my sanity into creating. See, Veronica continued, clearly mistaking my stunned silence for rapt attention. I'd handle all the day-to-day management stuff. You know, the boring paperwork, the scheduling, the business development. You could focus on what you're really good at, which is, like, the actual doctoring part. The actual doctoring part. Jesus Christ, she made it sound like I was some kind of trained monkey who could perform medical procedures but couldn't be trusted to tie my own shoes without supervision. Martin jumped back in, sensing that the pitch needed some heavyweight support. Veronica's got a real head for business, Aaron. Always has. Remember when she was 12 and started that lemonade stand? Pure entrepreneurial spirit. Yeah, I remembered the lemonade stand. I also remembered how it lasted exactly one weekend before Veronica got bored and convinced her parents to buy her a new bike instead. But sure, let's call that entrepreneurial spirit instead of what it actually was, a short attention span and wealthy parents willing to enable it. The best part, Isabel said, her voice dripping with fake excitement, is that it's all family. You won't have to worry about training some stranger or dealing with trust issues. Veronica already knows us. She understands the family dynamic, and she's got all these fresh ideas about how to expand the patient base and increase revenue streams. And then came the kicker, delivered with all the casual indifference of someone ordering a coffee. All she's asking for is 45% of the profits. 45% of the profits from the clinic that I built with my own hands, while they were all living their best lives on trust fund money and Instagram selfies. My fork was still suspended in midair, asparagus dangling like it was afraid to move, while my brain tried to process the sheer magnitude of what they'd just proposed. They wanted to give my sister-in-law nearly half of everything I'd worked for, just because she was family and had watched a few episodes of Shark Tank. The dining room fell silent except for the gentle clink of Clara's bracelet against her wine glass and the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears like a freight train approaching a collapsed bridge. You ever have one of those moments where time just stops and your brain decides to take a little trip down memory lane at the absolute worst possible moment? Yeah, well, that's exactly what happened while Veronica was sitting there preening like a peacock who'd just discovered mirrors, going on and on about her natural business instincts, and how she was basically the Steve Jobs of healthcare management. While she yapped about synergies and growth potential, buzzwords she'd probably picked up from whatever business podcast she'd binged last week, my mind went straight back to the beginning. Back to when I was pulling 36-hour shifts at Seattle General, surviving on vending machine coffee and whatever questionable sandwich meat they had in the hospital cafeteria, while slowly losing my damn mind, trying to save up enough money to open my own practice. I remembered those nights when I'd crash in the on-call room, using my lab coat as a blanket because I was too exhausted to drive the 45 minutes back to the apartment I could barely afford. Meanwhile, Isabel was posting Instagram stories from her weekend spa retreats with Veronica, complaining about how the cucumber water wasn't cold enough or how the massage therapist didn't use enough pressure on her stress knots. Stress knots? From what? deciding which Pilates class to attend. Those memories hit me like a freight train carrying a cargo load of pure, concentrated resentment. I could practically feel every single sleepless night, every skipped meal, every time I'd chosen to eat ramen noodles for the third day in a row so I could put another $100 toward my clinic fund. While I was literally grinding myself into dust, the Mitchell family was living their best life, completely oblivious to the fact that building something from nothing actually requires, work. And the loans. Jesus Christ, the loans. I'd gone to 3 different banks, getting rejected more times than a nerdy kid asking the prom queen to dance, before finally finding someone willing to take a chance on a guy with more dreams than collateral. The paperwork alone could have wallpapered my entire apartment, and the interest rates were so high they made loan sharks look generous. But did I get any help from my new family? Did Martin, with his extensive business connections and enough cash to buy a small island, offer to co-sign or provide some guidance? Hell no. Instead, I got lectures about the importance of building character through adversity and learning to stand on your own 2 feet. Easy words from a guy whose idea of adversity was having to wait 5 minutes for his country club's valet service. But wait, it gets better. While I was practically living at the clinic during those first few months, sleeping on a cot in what would eventually become my office because I couldn't afford both rent and the equipment I needed, Isabel was mysteriously unavailable for moral support. Where was she during those crucial early days when I was installing flooring myself because I couldn't afford contractors? Oh right, she was on a sisterly bonding trip to Cabo with Veronica, posting bikini selfies and complaining about how the resort's Wi-Fi was too slow to properly upload her vacation photos. And speaking of Veronica, let me tell you about the time, about 18 months into our marriage, when she'd blown through her monthly allowance from Daddy by the second week and came crying to us about not being able to make rent. Not because she'd had some emergency or unexpected expense, mind you, but because she'd decided that a weekend in Vegas with her college friends was more important than, having shelter. Guess who ended up covering her $2,400 rent payment? That's right, the guy who was still eating peanut butter sandwiches for lunch every day and driving a Honda Civic that sounded like it was slowly dying of emphysema. I'd handed over that money I'd been saving for new diagnostic equipment, because Isabel gave me those puppy dog eyes and explained how family takes care of family. Funny how that family loyalty only seemed to flow in one direction, isn't it? The worst part was watching them treat my clinic like it was some kind of hobby instead of a legitimate business. They'd drop by unannounced, expecting tours for their friends, asking if I could squeeze in appointments for people they knew, completely ignoring the fact that I had actual paying patients with real medical needs. Clara once brought her entire book club through during business hours, treating the place like it was a museum exhibit instead of a functioning medical practice. And the free treatments. Oh man, the free treatments. Martin's chronic back pain that required monthly adjustments. Clara's mysterious headaches that somehow only flared up right around the time she needed to look perfect for some charity gala. Veronica's various sports injuries from activities she tried for exactly 2 weeks before getting bored and moving on to something else. I'd been keeping track, not because I'm petty, but because I'm a responsible business owner who needs to know where his revenue is going. Over the past 3 years, I'd provided over $38,000 worth of free services to the Mitchell family. 38 grand that could have gone toward expanding the clinic, hiring additional staff, or maybe, just maybe, allowing me to take a vacation that didn't involve sleeping in my car at a rest stop. But did they see it that way? Did they appreciate the fact that I was essentially subsidizing their health care while barely keeping my own business afloat? Of course not. In their minds, I was just doing what family does, except somehow the reciprocal part of that equation never seemed to apply when I needed something. I thought about all those times I'd worked through lunch, grabbing whatever I could from the vending machine downstairs while reviewing patient files, because I couldn't afford to close the clinic for an hour. Meanwhile, Isabel was texting me photos of her $30 artisanal salads from whatever trendy restaurant she was trying that week with her unemployed sister. The real kicker was how they talked about my work when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Like it was cute that I had this little medical practice, this adorable side project that kept me busy while the real adults handled important things like choosing investment portfolios and planning charity auction themes. They never saw the late nights spent balancing books, the stress of making payroll, the constant pressure of being responsible for other people's health and well-being. To them, my clinic wasn't the culmination of years of education, sacrifice, and backbreaking work. It was just another asset in the family portfolio, something that generated money they could figure out how to spend. They looked at my life's work and saw dollar signs, profit margins, and opportunities for their precious Veronica to play businesswoman without any of the actual risk or investment. And now here they were, sitting around this perfectly staged dinner table, expecting me to just hand over nearly half of everything I'd built because they'd decided it was time for family management. Like my blood, sweat, and tears were just the opening act for the real show starring Veronica Mitchell and her groundbreaking business acumen. So there I was, still mentally calculating the astronomical cost of my in-laws' entitlement, when Veronica decided it was time to really lay on the charm offensive. She leaned forward with the confidence of someone who'd clearly practiced this pitch in front of her bedroom mirror, probably while wearing one of those ridiculous power blazers she'd bought after watching too many episodes of Suits. "See, Aaron," she began, her voice taking on that patronizing tone that people use when they're about to explain why giving them your money is actually the smartest thing you could possibly do. "What you've got here is a classic case of a brilliant professional who's spread too thin. You're amazing at the medical stuff. Like, seriously, everyone says you're super talented, but the business side? That's where you're losing money. Losing money. Right." The clinic that had been steadily growing its patient base, expanding its services, and actually turning a profit was apparently hemorrhaging cash because I hadn't handed the reins over to someone whose most recent business experience involved selling essential oils to her yoga classmates. "I mean, when was the last time you really looked at your profit margins?" she continued, pulling out what looked suspiciously like a PowerPoint presentation printed on cardstock. "Or analyzed your customer acquisition costs? Do you even have a comprehensive digital marketing strategy?" Customer acquisition costs. For a medical practice. Because apparently, sick people were now customers who needed to be acquired through strategic marketing campaigns instead of, word-of-mouth referrals from satisfied patients who actually got better under my care. But Veronica was just getting started. She'd clearly spent some quality time with Google and maybe a business book or two, because she was throwing around terms like operational efficiency and scalable growth models with the enthusiasm of someone who'd just discovered fire. "What I'm proposing," she said, spreading her homemade charts across the table like she was presenting the blueprints for the next Amazon, "is a complete restructuring of your current business model. A complete restructuring of the business model that was working just fine. Thank you very much. First, we'd implement a comprehensive patient management system that maximizes appointment throughput while minimizing administrative overhead," she announced, clearly proud of herself for stringing together that many business buzzwords in one sentence. "Then we develop targeted marketing campaigns to expand into underserved demographic segments." Translation: pack more patients into shorter time slots and advertise to people who couldn't afford quality healthcare. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Martin nodded along like Veronica was reciting the Constitution, occasionally making approving grunts that sounded suspiciously like a seal who'd learned to express satisfaction. "She's really done her homework, Aaron," he said, as if homework was somehow equivalent to years of medical training and actual business experience. "I'm impressed with the thoroughness of her analysis." Her analysis? Based on what, exactly? A quick Google search, and maybe a conversation with her hairdresser about how businesses should be run? But wait, there was more. Because Veronica had apparently decided that what my medical practice really needed was a complete brand overhaul. "I'm thinking we rebrand the whole experience," she said, her eyes lighting up like a kid who'd just discovered the toy aisle at Target. "Maybe something like Mitchell Wellness Solutions or Holistic Health Hub. Something that sounds more approachable and modern, Mitchell Wellness Solutions. Because nothing says, 'Trust me with your medical care,' like slapping the family name on a business they had absolutely nothing to do with building. And the boring paperwork stuff, insurance claims, scheduling, vendor negotiations, I'd handle all of that so you can focus on what you're passionate about," Veronica continued, making it sound like she was offering to take out my garbage instead of proposing to control every aspect of my business's operations. "You'd basically be able to just walk in, see patients, and walk out. No stress, no administrative headaches," Just pure medical practice. Just pure medical practice. Like running a successful clinic was as simple as showing up and pointing a stethoscope at people. Never mind the fact that understanding insurance regulations, managing staff, maintaining equipment, and handling vendor relationships were all crucial skills that took years to develop and even longer to master. Isabel jumped in with her own contribution to this masterpiece of delusion. "And think about how much more time we'd have together," she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand with what I'm sure she thought was loving encouragement. "No more late nights at the office, no more weekend emergencies. We could actually have a normal marriage." A normal marriage. Apparently, having a successful career that required dedication and hard work was abnormal. Who knew? Clara decided to add her own wisdom to the mix. Because why should Veronica have all the fun? Family businesses are so much more stable, she declared with the authority of someone who'd never actually run a business but had watched her husband inherit one. When you keep everything in the family, you don't have to worry about trust issues or conflicting interests. Conflicting interests. That was rich, coming from people whose primary interests seemed to be figuring out how to profit from my work without actually contributing anything meaningful to it. And then Martin delivered what he clearly thought was the coup de grace. He placed the contract directly in front of me with the solemnity of someone presenting a peace treaty that would end all wars. "We've already had our attorney draft up the paperwork," he announced, his voice thick with smugness. All the legal I's dotted and T's crossed. Very straightforward, very fair to everyone involved. Fair to everyone involved. Except for the guy who'd actually built the business they were trying to carve up like a Thanksgiving turkey. "The profit split is very reasonable," Clara murmured, clearly trying to sound like the voice of maternal wisdom instead of a co-conspirator in what was basically a family-sanctioned heist. 45% for management services is well within industry standards. Industry standards. For what industry exactly? The nepotism industry? The let's exploit our son-in-law industry? I reached for my water glass, taking a slow, deliberate sip while the entire Mitchell family stared at me like vultures waiting for roadkill to stop twitching. The silence stretched out, thick and expectant, while they waited for me to express my gratitude for this generous opportunity to hand over nearly half of everything I'd worked for. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I'd be so overwhelmed by their united front, so grateful for their offer to help, that I'd just sign on the dotted line and thank them for the privilege of being robbed blind by my own family. They had no idea what was sitting in my briefcase. You know that moment in every good heist movie where the mark thinks they've got everything figured out, and then the real mastermind reveals they've been 3 steps ahead the whole time? Yeah, well, welcome to my personal Ocean's 11 moment. Except instead of stealing from a casino, I was about to school my own family on what happens when you underestimate the guy you think is too nice to fight back. I set my water glass down with deliberate precision, the kind of calculated movement that would have made a chess grandmaster proud, and reached for my briefcase. Now, this wasn't just any briefcase. This was my good briefcase, the one I'd bought specifically for important meetings with insurance executives and hospital administrators. Italian leather, brass fittings, the kind of briefcase that says, "I'm not screwing around," without having to actually say it out loud. The click of the lock's opening echoed through that dining room like a gunshot in a library. I swear I could feel the entire Mitchell family's collective sphincter tighten as that sound cut through their smugness like a hot knife through butter. Martin's confident smile flickered for just a second, like a fluorescent light that's about to burn out. Clara's perfectly manicured fingers paused halfway to her wine glass. Veronica's PowerPoint presentation suddenly didn't seem quite as important as it had 30 seconds ago. But the real prize was watching Isabel's face. My dear, sweet wife, who'd clearly thought she'd married a pushover who would just roll over and play dead whenever her family decided to shake him down for lunch money. Looked like she'd just watched her favorite reality TV show get canceled mid-season. "Before we continue," I said, my voice calm and measured in that way that should have been their first clue that something was about to go very, very wrong with their little scheme, "there's something you should probably see." I reached into my briefcase with all the drama of a magician about to pull a rabbit out of a hat, except instead of a rabbit, I was about to produce something that would make their whole carefully orchestrated dinner party blow up in their faces like a defective firework. The first document I placed on the table was a thing of beauty, crisp, professional, with that official letterhead that makes lawyers charge $500 an hour just to look at it. This, I announced, sliding it across the table toward Martin like I was dealing the winning hand in a poker game, is the management services agreement I signed 3 weeks ago with Summit Health Partners. 3 weeks ago. While they'd been planning their little ambush, thinking they were so clever with their family meeting and their PowerPoint presentations and their presumptions about my business naivety, I'd been making moves of my own. Funny how that works out. Martin's face went through more color changes than a mood ring at a bipolar convention. He reached for the document with the enthusiasm of someone picking up a live scorpion, and I could practically see his blood pressure spiking as he scanned the first page. Summit Health Partners, I continued, my voice taking on that helpful, educational tone that teachers use when they're explaining something really obvious to particularly slow students, is one of the most respected healthcare management firms in the Pacific Northwest. They specialize in helping independent practices like mine streamline operations while maintaining complete clinical autonomy. Clara leaned over to peer at the document, her reading glasses sliding down her nose as she tried to make sense of what she was looking at. I don't understand, she said, her voice wavering like she'd just realized her retirement fund was invested in cryptocurrency. What does this mean? What it meant, dear Clara, was that while your family was sitting around planning how to carve up my business like a Christmas ham, I was actually doing something productive. But I decided to be helpful and point out the specific clause that was about to ruin their entire evening. If you look at page 4, clause 4.3, I said, helpfully highlighting the relevant section with my finger, you'll see it's highlighted in bright yellow for your convenience. It clearly states that no family members may be employed in management positions without unanimous board approval. Unanimous board approval. 3 little words that basically meant Veronica had about as much chance of managing my clinic as she did of being elected pope. The silence that followed was absolutely delicious. It was the kind of silence you get when a group of people suddenly realize they've been playing checkers while their opponent was playing chess, and they're about to get checkmated in front of their friends. Veronica was the first to break, her voice climbing about 3 octaves as the reality of the situation started to sink in. But that's not fair, she whined, sounding remarkably like a 5-year-old who'd just been told she couldn't have ice cream for dinner. You didn't even give us a chance to present our proposal. Oh, sweet, naive Veronica. I'd given them plenty of chances, 3 years' worth of chances, in fact. 3 years of watching them treat my clinic like their personal ATM, 3 years of listening to their suggestions about how I should run my business, 3 years of being patronized and condescended to by people who couldn't run a lemonade stand without driving it into bankruptcy. Actually, I said, enjoying every second of watching their master plan crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. The board already reviewed and rejected a similar proposal last month. Something about maintaining professional standards and avoiding conflicts of interest. That last part wasn't entirely true. I'd never actually presented their proposal to the board, mostly because I'm not an idiot, but they didn't need to know that. Sometimes a little creative interpretation of the truth is necessary for dramatic effect. Martin tried to rally, because guys like him don't go down without a fight, even when they're clearly outgunned and outmaneuvered. Well, surely there's some room for negotiation, he said, his voice carrying just a hint of desperation beneath the bluster. These contracts can always be modified if all parties agree. All parties agree. Like Summit Health Partners was going to risk their professional reputation to help the Mitchell family stage a corporate coup against their own client. That's not how business works in the real world, Martin, no matter how many country club connections you think you have. I'm afraid not, I replied, my tone as sympathetic as a funeral director explaining cremation options. The contract is pretty ironclad. Summit Health has very strict policies about family involvement in client businesses. Something about maintaining objectivity and preventing conflicts of interest. Isabel's smile, that perfect, practiced smile she'd been wearing all evening like a mask, finally started to crack around the edges. It was like watching a dam develop its first hairline fracture, knowing that the whole thing was about to come apart in spectacular fashion. But I wasn't done yet. Oh no, not by a long shot. This was just the opening act. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, I was about to serve up a whole goddamn buffet, and every single course was going to be ice cold and perfectly seasoned with 3 years' worth of accumulated resentment. Because while watching their faces crumble over the Summit Health contract was satisfying as hell, I was just getting warmed up. I reached back into my briefcase. And let me tell you, this thing was like Mary Poppins' bag at this point, just full of surprises that kept getting better and better, and pulled out another folder. This one was thicker, more worn around the edges, with little yellow sticky notes poking out like tiny flags of vindication. Since we're being so transparent about business arrangements, I said, setting the folder down with the same care a bomb disposal expert uses when handling live explosives, I thought you might be interested in reviewing some historical data about family involvement in my clinic. Historical data. I love that phrase because it sounds so clinical and professional, when what I really meant was, here's all the evidence of how your precious daughter has already proven she's about as qualified to run a medical practice as a golden retriever is to perform brain surgery. Martin's eyes narrowed like he was trying to calculate exactly how screwed they were, which, spoiler alert, was pretty damn screwed. What kind of historical data? He asked, his voice carrying about as much confidence as a weather forecaster predicting sunshine during a hurricane. I'm so glad you asked, I replied, opening the folder with theatrical flair that would have made Broadway producers weep with pride. These are patient complaint forms from the 3-month period when Veronica was helping out at the clinic. You remember that time, don't you, Veronica? When you insisted you could handle some of the administrative duties while I focused on patient care. Oh, I remembered that period, all right. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, except the car was my professional reputation and the crash was happening in real time with actual sick people caught in the wreckage. Veronica's face went through more color changes than a mood ring having an identity crisis. That's not fair, she protested, her voice climbing toward frequencies that only dogs could hear. I was just learning the system. Everyone makes mistakes when they're starting out. Everyone makes mistakes. Right. Let's talk about those mistakes, shall we? I pulled out the first complaint form, holding it up like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. Mrs. Henderson, 67 years old, diabetic. I read aloud. Quote, the girl at the front desk told me I didn't need to worry about my blood sugar levels because I looked skinny enough. End quote. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a scalpel. Clara looked like she'd just swallowed a live eel, and Martin was developing a facial tic that suggested his blood pressure was approaching stroke levels. But wait, there's more. Because Veronica's greatest hits collection was extensive enough to warrant its own anthology. Mr. Rodriguez, construction worker with a back injury. I continued, flipping to the next form. Quote, the receptionist suggested I try yoga instead of physical therapy because it worked for her friend's stress. End quote. Stress. She'd compared a herniated disc to stress and recommended yoga like she was some kind of wellness guru instead of someone whose medical training consisted of watching Grey's Anatomy reruns. And then there's my personal favorite, I said, savoring every word like fine wine. Mrs. Chun, elderly woman with arthritis. Quote, the young woman offered me a discount if I brought in more patients, like it was some kind of multi-level marketing scheme. End quote. A multi-level marketing scheme. Because apparently, Veronica thought running a medical practice was basically the same thing as selling essential oils to suburban housewives. Veronica tried to interrupt, her voice reaching new heights of indignation. Those people didn't understand what I was trying to do. I was being innovative, thinking outside the box. Innovative. That's what we're calling medical malpractice these days. Innovative thinking? Oh, but the complaints were just the beginning, I said, reaching for another section of the folder. Let's talk about the unauthorized discounts you gave to your friends. Remember Ashley from your yoga class? The one who came in for a consultation and somehow walked out having paid exactly $0 for a 40-minute session. Martin's face was now the color of an overripe tomato, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he tried to calculate the financial damage his daughter had caused. How much did these innovative approaches cost the clinic? He asked, his voice sounding like gravel being poured down a drain. I'm so glad you asked, I replied, pulling out a spreadsheet that I'd lovingly color-coded for maximum visual impact. Between the unauthorized discounts, the refunds I had to issue due to patient complaints, and the near miss with that insurance audit. You remember the insurance audit, don't you, Veronica? The one that almost cost me my provider contract because you filed claims using your own made-up diagnostic codes. Oh, the insurance audit. That had been a fun week, trying to explain to stone-faced bureaucrats why my clinic had submitted claims for conditions that didn't actually exist in medical literature. The total cost of Veronica's 3-month learning experience, I announced, letting the suspense build like a drum roll before the big reveal, was $12,847 in direct losses, plus approximately $25,000 in potential lost revenue from patients who never came back. $37,847. That number hung in the air like a bad smell that wouldn't go away, but I still wasn't finished. Oh no, not even close. Because the third folder I pulled out was the real showstopper, the grand finale that was going to make everything else look like the opening act at a community theater production. And since we're talking about family contributions to the clinic's success, I said, spreading out a series of financial documents like I was laying out a poker hand, I thought you might be interested in seeing exactly how much your family has invested in my business over the years. I could see Isabel's eyes widening as she realized where this was going, and for the first time all evening, she looked like she actually understood that maybe, just maybe, they'd bitten off more than they could chew. This, I said, pointing to a highlighted section on the first page, is a detailed accounting of all the free medical services I've provided to the Mitchell family over the past 3 years. Martin's monthly back adjustments, Clara's migraine treatments, Veronica's various sports injury consultations, and Isabel's dermatological procedures. The total at the bottom of the page was highlighted in bright red, like a warning sign on a dangerous curve. $38,247. $38,247 in free healthcare, while I was eating ramen noodles and sleeping in my office to keep the business afloat. If you've ever watched a controlled demolition of a building, you know there's this perfect moment when the charges go off and the whole structure just collapses in on itself. That's exactly what happened to the Mitchell family's carefully constructed facade the second that $38,247 figure sank into their entitled little brains. The dining room erupted like a volcano full of privilege and wounded pride. Veronica was the first to blow her gasket, shooting up from her chair so fast she nearly knocked over her wine glass. "That's completely unfair," she shrieked, her voice hitting frequencies that could probably shatter crystal. "You're twisting everything around. Those weren't mistakes. They were learning experiences." Learning experiences? Right. I guess nearly getting my medical license revoked was just tuition for Veronica's education in how not to run a healthcare facility. And those treatments weren't free, she continued, waving her hands around like she was conducting an orchestra of indignation. "We're family. Family helps family. You can't put a price tag on family support." "Oh, but I could, Veronica. I'd just done exactly that, complete with itemized receipts and insurance billing codes. Funny how family support only seemed to flow in one direction, though." Martin tried to regain control of the situation because guys like him hate losing the upper hand almost as much as they hate paying retail prices. "Now, Aaron," he started, his voice taking on that patronizing tone rich guys use when they're about to explain why screwing you over is actually good for you. "I think you're being a little unreasonable here. We never asked for those treatments to be free. Never asked for them to be free. That was technically true, if you ignored the part where they'd never once offered to pay, never questioned why they weren't getting bills, and basically treated my clinic like their personal medical concierge service." "You're right," I said, my voice calm as a frozen lake. "You never asked. You just assumed. The same way you're assuming now that I'd be thrilled to hand over 45% of my business to someone whose greatest professional achievement is getting a customer service complaint filed against her by a senior citizen with arthritis." Clara decided to jump into the fray, because apparently this family reunion wasn't quite chaotic enough yet. "Aaron, honey," she said, clutching her chest like she was auditioning for a daytime soap opera, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We only want what's best for you and the clinic." "What's best for me?" That's rich, coming from someone who'd spent the last 3 years treating me like an ATM with a medical degree. "Everyone just needs to calm down," Isabel chimed in, trying to play the peacemaker role she'd clearly rehearsed in her head. "Aaron, you're being unreasonable. We're trying to help you, and you're acting like we're trying to steal from you or something." acting like they were trying to steal from me. Because wanting 45% of my life's work in exchange for Veronica's proven ability to alienate patients and nearly destroy my professional reputation was totally reasonable. That's when I stood up. Not dramatically, not with any grand gestures, just a simple, measured movement that somehow felt like the most powerful thing I'd ever done. For the first time in 3 years of sitting at this table, feeling like a guest at my own family dinner, I felt taller than everyone else in the room. You want to know what's unreasonable? I asked, my voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that makes people stop talking and start listening. What's unreasonable is spending 3 years watching you all treat my clinic like your personal piggy bank, while I worked myself into the ground to keep it running. The silence that followed was beautiful. Pure, crystalline silence that cut through their protests like a hot knife through butter. What's unreasonable? I continued, really hitting my stride now, is listening to Veronica lecture me about business management when she couldn't successfully manage a lemonade stand without running it into bankruptcy and blaming the customers for not appreciating her innovative approach to citrus-based beverages. Veronica's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. Probably for the first time in her adult life, she was literally speechless. What's unreasonable is sitting here listening to you all talk about family loyalty while you plan how to divvy up the profits from a business you had absolutely nothing to do with building. Martin tried to interrupt, his face now resembling an overripe eggplant. Aaron, I think you're forgetting that family. No, I said, cutting him off with the kind of finality that ends conversations. I'm not forgetting anything. I'm remembering everything. Every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every time I chose to invest in my clinic instead of taking a vacation because I actually gave a damn about building something meaningful. I reached for my briefcase, closing it with the same deliberate precision I'd used to open it. The click of the locks sounded like a judge's gavel ending a trial. My clinic isn't your piggy bank, I said, looking each of them in the eye with the kind of steady gaze that makes liars uncomfortable. It's not your retirement plan. It's not your daughter's playground. And it's sure as hell not your family's consolation prize for raising someone who thinks medical billing codes are more like suggestions than actual requirements. Clara gasped like I'd just announced I was joining a cult, and Isabel's perfect composure finally cracked completely. Aaron, she whispered, and for the first time all evening, she sounded like the woman I'd married instead of a stranger reading from a script. You'd really put your business before your family? Before my family. Like wanting to maintain control of the business I'd built with my own hands was somehow a betrayal of family values. No, Isabel, I replied, and I could feel something fundamental shifting inside me, like tectonic plates realigning after an earthquake. I'm putting boundaries before exploitation. I'm putting my life's work before your family's sense of entitlement. I'm putting professional integrity before whatever this is supposed to be. I gestured around the dining room with its staged perfection and calculated manipulation. You want to call that putting business before family? Fine. But don't pretend this is about family loyalty when what you really mean is that you expected me to roll over and play dead while you carved up everything I've worked for. The dining room felt different now, like the air pressure had changed. Their power was broken, their carefully laid plans scattered like confetti after a parade. For the first time since I'd walked through their front door, I felt like I could breathe again. And they looked exactly like what they were. A group of people who'd just realized they'd underestimated the guy they thought was too polite to fight back. You know how in action movies, after the big explosion, there's always that moment of eerie silence before the debris starts raining down? Yeah, well, walking out of the Mitchell family mansion that night felt exactly like that, except instead of rubble falling from the sky, I had the distinct feeling that my marriage was about to come crashing down around my ears. I drove home to my own apartment. Yeah, that's right, my own apartment, because about 6 months into this matrimonial adventure, I'd figured out that keeping my own place was probably the smartest financial decision I'd ever make. Call it insurance, call it a backup plan, or call it the subconscious knowledge that marrying into the Mitchell family was like signing up for a lifetime subscription to being professionally disappointed. The apartment wasn't much to look at, a one-bedroom place in Capitol Hill that I'd originally rented when I was still an overworked resident with dreams bigger than my bank account. But it was mine, paid for with money I'd earned myself, furnished with stuff I'd actually chosen instead of inherited from someone's dead great-aunt's estate sale. No imported Italian marble, no family portraits glaring down at me from gilded frames, no subtle reminders that I was basically a guest in my own life. I cracked open a beer. A perfectly ordinary, non-artisanal beer that probably cost less than what the Mitchells spent on a single bottle of their pretentious wine collection, and settled into my beat-up leather recliner. The kind of chair that actually looked better with age, unlike certain family relationships I could mention. That's when the memories really started flooding back, and let me tell you, it was like watching a highlight reel of every moment over the past 3 years when I should have seen this coming. Because here's the thing about the Mitchell family. They'd never been subtle about viewing me as an investment opportunity rather than, an actual human being with thoughts and feelings and basic property rights. I remembered the conversation at our engagement party, when Martin had pulled me aside with that conspiratorial smile and started talking about family synergy and leveraging collective resources. At the time, I thought he was just being friendly, maybe a little buzzed on champagne and paternal pride. Now I realized he'd been conducting a feasibility study for tonight's hostile takeover attempt. Then there was the time, about a year into our marriage, when Clara had casually mentioned how wonderful it would be if Veronica could get some real-world business experience somewhere. She'd said it with that innocent tone that mothers use when they're suggesting you might want to consider giving their precious daughter a kidney, just as a favor to the family. And Isabel, Jesus, Isabel. Looking back, I could see the pattern clear as day. Every conversation about my work had been peppered with little comments about how I was working too hard and needed to delegate more. I'd thought she was being supportive, worried about my stress levels and work-life balance. Turns out she was basically conducting market research for tonight's ambush. The really twisted part was how they'd made me feel guilty for working hard. Like dedication to my profession was some kind of character flaw instead of, the reason I could afford to keep their daughter in the lifestyle to which she'd become accustomed. Every late night at the clinic, every weekend I'd spent catching up on paperwork, every time I'd chosen professional responsibility over family dinner had been filed away as evidence of my need for better management. My phone started buzzing around 10 o'clock. First, it was Isabel. "Aaron, we need to talk. What happened tonight was completely unacceptable. Call me." Unacceptable. Right. Refusing to be financially manipulated by my own family was unacceptable, but staging an intervention to steal my business was just good old-fashioned family planning. Delete. Then Martin tried his luck, probably figuring that man-to-man diplomacy might work where his daughter's emotional manipulation had failed. "Aaron, I think there may have been some miscommunication tonight. Let's discuss this like adults. I'm sure we can find a mutually beneficial arrangement." Mutually beneficial arrangement. Translation: let's figure out a way to screw you over that you'll actually agree to. Delete. Clara's text was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation disguised as maternal concern. "Aaron, dear, I'm worried about you. You seem so stressed tonight. Family shouldn't fight like this. We love you and only want what's best. Please call when you're ready to work this out. We love you." "Sure you do, Clara. You love me the same way vultures love roadkill. As an opportunity to feed yourselves." Delete. But it was Veronica's message that really took the cake. "Aaron, I can't believe you're being so selfish about this. I put a lot of work into that business plan, and you didn't even give it a fair chance. This isn't over. Selfish. For wanting to maintain control of the business I'd built with my own hands." And that last line, "this isn't over," sounded less like a family member expressing disappointment and more like a threat from someone who'd watched too many corporate espionage movies. Delete. Delete, delete. The texts kept coming throughout the night, each one more desperate than the last. Isabel alternated between guilt trips, "How can you do this to us?" Emotional manipulation, "I thought you loved me," and thinly veiled threats, "Dad's lawyer thinks there might be grounds for a lawsuit." A lawsuit, because apparently, refusing to hand over your business to your unqualified sister-in-law was somehow actionable in their twisted version of reality. Around midnight, I turned off my phone and just sat there in the silence of my own space, drinking my beer and processing what had just happened. For 3 years, I'd been living in a carefully constructed fantasy where I thought I was part of a family. Turns out I'd actually been the mark in a long con. the target of a 3-year psychological campaign designed to soften me up for tonight's financial mugging. The worst part wasn't the money they'd wanted, though 45% of my profits would have been a hell of a hit. The worst part was realizing how completely they'd misunderstood who I was. They'd looked at my politeness and mistaken it for weakness. They'd seen my willingness to help family and interpreted it as an invitation to exploitation. They'd watched me work hard to build something meaningful and decided that made me a sucker who deserved to be taken advantage of. But here's what they'd failed to understand. There's a difference between being nice and being naive. There's a difference between family loyalty and financial martyrdom. And there's a huge difference between someone who's too polite to make waves and someone who's just been waiting for the right moment to show you exactly what those waves look like when they finally break. I'd spent 3 years being the accommodating son-in-law, the guy who showed up to family dinners and smiled through their casual condescension and paid for their medical treatments without complaint. Tonight, for the first time, I'd been myself, Aaron Mercer, the guy who'd built a successful medical practice from nothing, who'd earned every dollar in his bank account, and who sure as hell wasn't going to hand over his life's work to a family that saw him as a wallet with legs. And you know what? It felt absolutely fantastic. You know what they say about the best revenge being living well? Well, turns out they were absolutely right. And let me tell you, the next few months were like watching my life transform from a depressing indie film into one of those feel-good success stories that make you want to pump your fist in the air and buy everyone drinks. First thing that happened was the radio silence from Casa Mitchell lasted exactly 72 hours before desperation started setting in. Isabel's texts went from indignant to pleading to downright pathetic faster than a cryptocurrency crash. Aaron, please call me. We can work this out. I miss you. Miss me? Right. What she missed was her access to my financial success and the status that came with being married to a successful doctor. But here's the beautiful thing about cutting toxic people out of your life. Suddenly you have all this mental energy and emotional bandwidth that you didn't even realize was being drained by their constant neediness and manipulation. It was like finally removing a pair of shoes that had been too tight for years. You don't realize how much they were hurting until you take them off and feel that incredible relief. My partnership with Summit Health Partners turned out to be exactly what my clinic needed. These people were actual professionals who understood the healthcare industry instead of wannabe entrepreneurs whose business experience came from watching Shark Tank reruns. Within the first month, we'd streamlined my appointment scheduling system, upgraded my electronic health records, and implemented a patient follow-up program that was already showing measurable improvements in treatment outcomes. Jennifer Walsh, my account manager at Summit, was everything Veronica wasn't: competent, experienced, and refreshingly honest about what she did and didn't know. Your patient satisfaction scores are already above average, she told me during our first quarterly review. But there's definitely room for improvement in operational efficiency. Operational efficiency, not buzzword bingo or half-ass schemes to rebrand my practice as some kind of wellness spa, but actual, measurable improvements to how my clinic functioned. It was like having a conversation with an adult after 3 years of dealing with children who dressed up in business suits. The expansion happened faster than I'd expected. By month 3, we'd added 2 new treatment rooms and hired Sarah Chun, a licensed physical therapist who brought her own small but dedicated patient base. Sarah was exactly the kind of person I'd always wanted to work with: smart, dedicated, and more interested in helping people get better than in figuring out how to maximize profit margins. "This place has good energy," she told me on her first day, looking around the newly renovated space with the kind of professional appreciation that made my chest swell with pride. "You can tell someone actually cares about the work being done here. Someone actually cares. Damn right someone cares." I'd poured everything I had into this place, and it showed in every detail, from the comfortable waiting room furniture to the state-of-the-art equipment to the way my staff genuinely enjoyed coming to work every day. By month 4, we'd established our community outreach program. Something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the resources for when I was trying to support the Mitchell family's lifestyle. We partnered with 3 local high schools to provide sports injury prevention workshops and free screenings for student athletes. Watching 18-year-old kids learn proper stretching techniques and injury prevention strategies felt more rewarding than any fancy dinner party I'd ever attended at the Mitchell Mansion. The Underserved Patients Program launched in month 5. We reserved 4 appointment slots per week for people who couldn't afford regular health care, subsidized through a combination of our profits and a small grant I'd managed to secure through Summit's connections. Mrs. Rodriguez, a 63-year-old housekeeper with chronic back pain who'd been living on over-the-counter painkillers for 2 years, broke down crying when I told her we could provide ongoing treatment at no cost to her. "Doctor, are you sure?" she asked, her English heavily accented, but her gratitude crystal clear. "My insurance, it doesn't cover much, and I cannot pay the full price." "Mrs. Rodriguez," I told her, "taking care of people is why I became a doctor. The money is just what keeps the lights on." That's when it really hit me. This was what I'd always wanted my practice to be. Not a cash cow for entitled relatives, not a status symbol for social climbing in-laws, but an actual healthcare facility that made people's lives better. The kind of place where a housekeeper with back pain could get the same quality treatment as a tech executive with a sports injury. Meanwhile, the Mitchell family drama was playing out exactly like I'd expected. Isabel's texts became increasingly desperate and manipulative. "Dad's lawyer says there might be legal options for me to claim part of the clinic since I'm your wife." Legal options. Because apparently, being married to someone automatically entitled you to half their life's work, even if your only contribution was complaining about how much time they spent building it. My response was simple. I forwarded her text to my own lawyer, along with copies of our prenuptial agreement. Yeah, that's right. I'd been smart enough to insist on one despite her family's protests about it being unromantic. Funny how unromantic financial protection seems until you actually need it. Martin tried a different approach, reaching out through my accountant with vague threats about business interference and improper use of family connections. My accountant, bless his cynical heart, shut that down faster than a bar during last call. "Mr. Mitchell," he told Martin, "your son-in-law doesn't owe you jack shit. And if you keep harassing my client, we'll file a restraining order that'll make your country club friends very uncomfortable." But the real entertainment came from Veronica's social media campaign. Apparently, losing access to my clinic had triggered some kind of psychological breakdown where she convinced herself that all her business ideas were being stolen by competitors. Her Instagram stories became a daily soap opera of passive-aggressive posts about fake people and stolen opportunities and family betrayal. My personal favorite was the post where she announced she was starting her own wellness consultancy to help small businesses reach their full potential. Within a week, she'd managed to alienate 3 potential clients by suggesting they needed to completely rebrand their successful operations to match her vision of what a modern business should look like. The best part? None of it touched me. Their drama, their desperation, their increasingly pathetic attempts to maintain relevance in my life. It all felt like watching a bad reality TV show that you could turn off whenever you got bored. My clinic was thriving, my staff felt like family, and for the first time in 3 years, I was actually excited about going to work every morning. A year later, I'm standing in my office looking out at something that still makes me shake my head in amazement every single morning. The waiting room is buzzing with activity, not the frantic, overwhelmed chaos of an understaffed clinic, but the steady, purposeful energy of a place where people actually want to be. Well, as much as anyone wants to be at a medical facility, anyway. Sarah's laughing with Mrs. Patterson, an 80-year-old retired teacher who comes in twice a week for her arthritis treatments and always brings homemade cookies that she insists on sharing with the entire staff. Miguel, our new front desk coordinator, is patiently explaining insurance coverage to a nervous college student who's getting his first real injury evaluation. The whole scene feels like what I'd always imagined when I dreamed about having my own practice. Except better, because it's real and it's mine and nobody can take it away from me. The expansion to our second location is happening next month. Not because some entitled family member decided we needed to scale for maximum profit optimization, but because we've got a waiting list 3 weeks long and a reputation in the community that's bringing in referrals faster than we can handle them. The new space is going to specialize in sports medicine and rehabilitation, with 2 additional physical therapists and a massage therapist who actually knows what she's doing, unlike certain people I could mention who thought watching YouTube videos qualified as professional training. Dr. Amanda Foster, who's joining us next month, stopped by yesterday to finalize her contract details. She's exactly the kind of professional I want to work with. Board-certified, experienced, and passionate about treating patients instead of treating bank accounts. I've heard really good things about this place, she told me while we toured the new facility. Word in the medical community is that you're doing things the right way here. The right way? Imagine that, running a healthcare facility with integrity and professional standards. What a revolutionary concept. Our scholarship program for young therapists is launching in the fall. We're partnering with the University of Washington's physical therapy program to provide hands-on training opportunities for students who show promise but need financial support. It's the kind of thing I'd always wanted to do, but never had the resources for when 45% of my profits were being siphoned off to support various Mitchell family lifestyle choices. The community health fair we organized last month drew over 300 people. Watching families get free health screenings, seeing kids learn about proper nutrition and exercise, helping elderly residents understand their Medicare benefits. That's the kind of impact I'd always wanted to have. Not as someone's cash machine, but as an actual healthcare provider making a real difference in people's lives. And speaking of the Mitchell family, their occasional attempts to insert themselves back into my life have become increasingly pathetic and increasingly ineffective. Isabel's texts have evolved from desperate pleas to lawyer threats to birthday cards with passive-aggressive messages about what we used to have. What we used to have was an arrangement where I worked my ass off while she spent my money and her family plotted to steal my business. I'm not exactly nostalgic for those good old days. Martin tried reaching out through a mutual business acquaintance last month, suggesting we put the past behind us and explore new opportunities for collaboration. The acquaintance, a guy who owns several successful restaurants downtown, just laughed and told Martin that anyone stupid enough to try to steal from Aaron Mercer probably wasn't someone he wanted to do business with. Word gets around in the business community, and apparently my reputation for not tolerating bullshit has become one of my selling points. Clara's latest attempt at reconciliation was a handwritten note that arrived with a gift basket full of expensive organic products that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. The note was all about family forgiveness and moving forward, and how life is too short to hold grudges. Life is also too short to waste time on people who see you as a profit center instead of a human being, but I guess that didn't make it into her Hallmark card philosophy. But the real crown jewel of their ongoing delusion was Veronica's announcement that she's starting her own healthcare consulting business. According to her LinkedIn profile, yes, I occasionally check their social media for entertainment value. She's now a healthcare innovation specialist who helps medical practices optimize their patient experience through strategic operational improvements. Her credentials for this new career? 3 months of nearly destroying my clinic and a certificate from some online business course that probably cost less than a decent dinner. The best part is that she's apparently been cold calling medical practices around Seattle, trying to sell her services based on her extensive experience in healthcare management. I know this because Dr. Peterson, who runs the orthopedic clinic 2 blocks from here, called me last week to ask if I knew anything about some woman named Mitchell who claimed she used to manage your practice. Used to manage my practice? I told him. She couldn't manage a McDonald's drive-thru without causing a 3-car pileup. We both had a good laugh about that, but it's also a perfect example of how the Mitchell family operates. They can't just fade away quietly. They have to keep finding new ways to embarrass themselves while trying to profit from their connection to me. My divorce was finalized 3 months ago. Isabel fought for alimony until her lawyer explained that prenuptial agreements with cheating clauses aren't just suggestions, and that her little affair with her yoga instructor, yeah, I found out about that too, had basically voided any financial claims she might have had. Turns out that while I was building a successful business, she was building a relationship with someone who could help her achieve better mind-body alignment. The mind-body alignment apparently didn't include honesty or fidelity, but I'm sure that's just an oversight in the curriculum. These days, I wake up in my apartment, which I've actually started fixing up now that I'm not supporting someone else's shopping addiction. And I feel something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement about the day ahead. Not the grim determination of someone grinding through another day of being taken advantage of, but actual enthusiasm for the work I'm doing and the life I'm building. Yesterday, as I was locking up the clinic after a particularly satisfying day of helping people get better, I caught my reflection in the front window and realized something. I looked different. Not older or younger, but more solid somehow. More present. Like I'd finally grown into my own skin instead of wearing someone else's expectations like an ill-fitting suit. I whispered to myself, just loud enough to hear it echo off the empty street. I am Aaron Mercer. I built this with my own hands. And I don't answer to anyone who sees me as a wallet instead of a man. For the first time in my adult life, I feel completely, genuinely, authentically free. While I ate my birthday dinner alone, my wife and family was secretly celebrating my brother. They asked for my help with his wedding, so I gave them an answer they'll never forget before boarding a flight and disappearing forever. I packed my bags and left everyone shocked. Let me paint you a picture of my life before everything went sideways. Picture a guy who lives his entire existence like a perfectly balanced spreadsheet. Every cell in its place, every formula calculated down to the last decimal. That's me, Marcus Hale, 32 years old and counting, professional number cruncher extraordinaire. I analyze financial portfolios for a living, which basically means I spend my days telling rich people whether their money is making more money or if they're about to lose their shirts. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and feeds my obsession with patterns, precision, and making sense of chaos. But here's the kicker. While I've got everyone else's finances figured out to the penny, my own life has been running on some seriously screwed up accounting. See, at the office, I'm the guy who catches discrepancies that could cost millions. I'm the detail-oriented bastard who remembers which client prefers their reports in Times New Roman versus Arial. My colleagues respect me, my boss trusts me, and my work speaks for itself. But the moment I walk through my front door, man, I might as well be invisible ink on white paper. My wife Clara, beautiful, charming, social butterfly Clara, has this way of making me feel like I'm perpetually auditioning for the role of husband in my own damn marriage. Don't get me wrong, she's not evil or anything. She just has this talent for making me feel like the supporting character in what should be our story together. It's like she's the lead actress, and I'm the guy who delivers her coffee on set. Always there, always reliable, but never quite important enough to get my name in the credits. And then there's my family. Oh boy, where do I even start with that